purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring about next week's schedule.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, for the purposes of announcing next week's schedule.
I thank the Republican whip for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House is not in session. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 12:30 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business, and on Friday, if needed, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. A complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow, as is the custom. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we will consider H-Con Res. 248 on the Afghanistan War Powers resolution introduced by Mr. Kucinich, and we will also consider H-Res. 1031, impeaching G. Thomas Porteous, Jr., Judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana, for high crimes and misdemeanors. It is also possible, Mr. Speaker, there would be further actions on the jobs agenda, which depends upon what the Senate or the House has coming out of committee or out of the Senate. And I thank the gentleman for yielding.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the gentleman if he could give us some better indication of what he means by the jobs agenda. And I yield.
We believe that the number one priority for us is to continue to grow the economy so that we will create jobs in this economy. As the gentleman knows, my perception is we've gone from losing an average of 726,000 jobs in the last 3 months of the Bush administration, the last 3 months losing an average of 35,000 jobs. That is 95% in the right direction, but we need to continue to try to create jobs. As you know, in the bill that we just passed, which was passed in a bipartisan fashion in the Senate and to some degree here, we are trying to encourage the hiring of those who have been unemployed through giving tax credits. We've also tried to spur investment by giving businesses the right to write off items. We also ensured the continuation of the Highway Act, and in addition to that, as you know, we provided for a less expensive way for communities to expand public works and hire people to do that, public buildings, construction of public facilities. So that when I say the agenda, that was obviously a part of the agenda. We still are very concerned about lending, capital being available to small particularly, but medium-sized businesses as well. The Senate is considering a jobs bill now, as you know, with a number of component parts. So when I talk about the jobs agenda, I'm talking about ways and means and efforts to grow the economy and create jobs.
I thank the gentleman, and the gentleman refers to several areas that I hope that he and the majority would work with the minority on in trying to do exactly as he stated, which is to create an environment for small businesses to create jobs. And as the gentleman just saw in the vote taking place on the floor today, there were 35 members of his caucus that voted against the so-called jobs bill that was on the floor today, perhaps indicating, Mr. Speaker, that the gentleman may want to work with us as we have been continuing to propose tax cuts for small businesses. Not necessarily connected with what kind of hires the businesses should do, not necessarily connected with some type of targeted credit that may or may not fit with the business model of any particular small business. But in general, Mr. Speaker, I think the gentleman would agree, making it easier for small businesses to keep the lights on right now so that they can return to a mode in which they could increase payroll. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman if he could speak to his mention of the resolution dealing with the Afghanistan war powers. As the gentleman knows, the Republicans view a withdrawal from Afghanistan within 30 days as incredibly irresponsible. Mr. Speaker, I would think that
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Just for accuracy, it's my understanding that the resolution that the gentleman from Ohio has introduced is by December 31st, I believe, not 30 days. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that. And still, I would say the Republican view is we have consistently supported this president in his efforts in Afghanistan as he has listened to the commanders on the ground to determine the focus and future of our presence there in terms of protecting our troops and the U.S. interest there. So I imagine my friend from Maryland, knowing his position on these things, agrees with that. And I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker, whether there will be an all-out push to make this some type of partisan issue, and perhaps the gentleman could shed some light on his position on this bill that is being brought forward next week, and I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think, as the gentleman knows, I've expressed support for the policy being pursued by President Obama, and I certainly intend to continue to support that policy. The resolution is not consistent with that, so I think the gentleman is not going to be surprised that my expectation this will be a bipartisan vote, perhaps on both sides of the proposition, yea and nay. But I certainly think it's going to be a bipartisan vote, and I think I believe the President's policy that he has articulated is a thoughtful, measured policy, and very frankly, I think he has done what perhaps we should have been doing for some period of time, focused on where terrorism was organized against the United States to ensure that we eliminate al-Qaeda and prevent the Taliban from resurgence and reestablishing a base wherefrom terrorists might attack us. I think that's appropriate policy that the President's pursuing, and I would hope that the House would support that policy on both sides of the aisle.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. I look forward to joining him in opposition to the resolution he's bringing to the floor. Mr. Speaker, if I could ask the gentleman to give us in the House an update on when he expects the budget resolution to come to the floor, and I yield.
We hope that the budget resolution will come to the floor, and we're working on that by the end of the month, before we leave for the Easter break. As you can well imagine, given the fiscal situation that confronts us, that's a very difficult document to put together. But Mr. Spratt is working very hard at that with the committee. I know Mr. Ryan, I'm sure the ranking member is also working hard on that, and I'm hopeful that we will be in a position to bring that to the floor before the Easter break.
I thank the gentleman for that, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the gentleman, in view of the short period of time until the Easter break, is it his expectation that the House will take up health care legislation within that time period? And I yield.
It is the President's hope and our hope that that will be the case. As you know, the President has expressed that objective, and we have said that will be our objective as well. As you know, we have been working on this issue for well over a year. We passed a bill many months ago. The Senate passed a bill over 2 months ago. Many of us have been working on that bill. As you know, we had a very substantial, historic, really, in many respects, a discussion with the President at Blair House last week. I understand the President has incorporated a number of ideas that he felt were good ideas that Republicans put on the table at that meeting, and my expectation is we will be moving on this bill in the near future. And what I mean by that is, again, hopefully that we would be able to consider this prior to the April break, the Easter break.
I thank the gentleman. And, Mr. Speaker, the President has asked Congress, in fact yesterday, that the majority here consider using the reconciliation process to pass this health care bill. And I'd like to ask the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that is it his intention and the Speaker's intention to adhere to the President's request and actually use the reconciliation process, and I yield.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. As the gentleman knows, we provided for reconciliation in the budget resolution that was adopted last year. so that is available to us. That has been used 22 times, as the gentleman knows, since 1980. 16 of those times it was used when your party was in the majority. You utilized that to do what the American people think is usually the case. We pass things by majority vote, up or down, and the majority rules. Now, here, of course, when the majority rules, it really does represent a majority of the country. In the Senate, of course, even when a majority votes, it doesn't necessarily represent a majority of the people of the country, because obviously every state, no matter how large or small, is represented. But having said that, we believe that the Republicans, when you used it for tax bill or welfare or other very important pieces of legislation, tax bill obviously having trillions of dollars of economic impact on the economy, you felt that that process of passing it by majority vote in the United States Senate made sense. We share your view.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for that, and I would say that nothing compares to the use of, or suggested use of, reconciliation then as to now with this bill. And I would say that there was, in the main, bipartisan support and, frankly, support on the part of people of this country for what was being done through reconciliation in those instances. But I'd like to turn the gentleman's attention, Mr. Speaker, to a question that I have, and that is statements that were made as late as September of '07 when then-candidate Obama said, "This is an area where we're going to have a 60% majority in the Senate and the House in order to actually get a bill to my desk. We're going to have a majority to get a bill to my desk that is not just a 50+1 majority," said then Senator Obama. You got to break out of what I call the sort of 50+1 pattern of presidential politics. Maybe you eke out a victory with 50+1, but you can't govern. You know, you get Air Force One and a lot of nice perks as president, but you can't. You can't deliver on health. We're not going to pass universal health care with a 50+1 strategy. That later, quote, again, was the next month in October. So I'm having difficulty understanding, Mr. Speaker, why now the President and the majority seem to have done a 180 when it comes to using reconciliation with a bill, a $1 trillion bill, that could very well alter a sixth of our economy. And I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me repeat. His 180 was incorporated as a way to go forward last year when we adopted the budget almost a year ago. So this is nothing new for the gentleman. I told the gentleman his party has used this procedure 16 times out of 22 times that it's been used, which means your party has used it two-thirds of the time, over two-thirds of the time that it's been employed. As a matter of fact, Judge Gregg, a member of your party, a leader of the Budget Committee on your side, was chairman of the Budget Committee, now ranking member, when objection was raised on that, we're using quotes, when objection was raised to that, said as he turned to the Democratic side, "What's wrong with a majority vote? I thought a majority vote was what should prevail." That was Judge Gregg of your party, and I think it's ironic that when we're saying, okay, you think a majority vote's good, we'll take a majority vote. Now, the President's quote is a demonstration that we all say things that, unfortunately, then don't become reality. And I will tell you the reason they don't become reality. Because, as Jim DeMint said, I think many of your party hopes this is President Obama's Waterloo. That's a direct quote. You use quotes from Mr. DeMint. Your belief is, in my view, I do not attribute it to you, but my belief is, as Mr. Gingrich pointed out over and over again, if we fail, you win. The problem is, if we fail, we believe the American people lose. And we think that's not fair. And I will use one more quote, and then I will cease and yield back to you. October of '08, presidential campaign debate, national television. John McCain, your candidate, said, I want to see a plan that gives all Americans, all families, availability of affordable health care. That was the quote that Senator McCain, your candidate for president, made just a few months ago. It was almost exactly what Mr. Obama said. So, from my perception, there was a consensus with respect to where we needed to go. As a matter of fact, I think almost every member on this floor believes that we need to reform the health care system. We've had a very vigorous debate, a very open debate, a very transparent debate over a year now on how this ought to be done. We have disagreement, and that's the nature of democracy. But if a majority of the representatives in this body and a majority of the representatives in the other body believe a policy ought to be adopted, then, frankly, that's the way our system should work. There's nothing in the Constitution, as the gentleman well knows, about having, except for some rare instances, a supermajority, and certainly none on policy. There are on confirmations and overriding president's veto. But other than that, the perception is the majority vote rules. So it's a procedure you used. It's a procedure that we anticipated last March. We hope that wouldn't be the case. Very frankly, we would hope that we could work in a bipartisan way to effect this end. That, at this point in time, hasn't been possible, and Senator McConnell has made it pretty clear that he has no intention of participating in that kind of effort. I yield back to my friend.
I thank the gentleman, and I don't know if the gentleman is saying, Mr. Speaker, that maybe the President was wrong when he spoke about not using this process, but I do know, Mr. Speaker, that 70-some% of the American people don't like this health care bill. I think the gentleman is correct, Mr. Speaker, that all of us care about doing something positive for health care. Republicans care about health care. We went to that forum with our ideas. The public began to see for 7 hours that there were very different approaches to how we're going to deal with health care. And we said, if we can stop the overhaul, stop the $1 trillion attempt to lead us to a path for government getting in the way of decision-making between patients and their doctors, if we can set that aside, there could be some things that we could work on much more modest and focused in terms of cost control. Once we reduce costs, people can have access. More people could have insurance. We could also do some things together to address the problems of pre-existing condition exceptions and coverage. All of us want to do something about that. So I'd say to the gentleman, I am disappointed, as I know he knows that we are, that his side has decided to defy the protests that came from the President and others on his side of the aisle about the use of reconciliation for health care. But I'd ask the gentleman, will the House move next on health care, or will it be the Senate? And I yield.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. We are still discussing exactly what procedure will be employed to affect a majority vote in both houses to send something to the President in the same form. But so I can't specifically answer that question at this particular time. But let me say to the gentleman, he mentions the forum we went to, and Republicans did put ideas on the table. We thought they were constructive. As a matter of fact, as you may recall, I responded to Senator Coburn, who's also a medical doctor, when he mentioned about fraud, waste, and abuse. As you know, there's substantial investment in both the House bill and the Senate bill to eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. Senator Coburn observed he thought there was a lot of money that could be saved there. We think that's the case as well, so we have provided to go after that. We also, I think, agree that reform ought to be based on a private, market-based system. As the gentleman knows, the exchanges that are set up both in the House bill and the Senate bill, they differ, but they are both based on private sector competition by private insurance companies. We also talked about wellness programs. Dr. Coburn also talked about that. as did others, and a couple of other died. I think Dr. Bustani, Congressman Bustani, also talked about that. We have very substantial investment in wellness and in practices, as Dr. Coburn pointed out, in practices that give cooperative care and are not reimbursed piecemeal, but are reimbursed by the quality of care that is given, the outcomes that are given, as opposed to simply process-oriented. We also agree, I think, Mr. Cantor, on mechanisms to have competition across state lines. We believe the exchanges do that, but we also believe there's room for discussion of looking at how we might do that in other ways as well. So we think that that's an idea. And the pooling with respect to small businesses so they can create large groups so that they can have better competitive advantages. We believe that when we put small businesses into the exchange, that's exactly what we give them. For instance, in a large group, as all of us know, as we have in the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan, we don't have pre-existing conditions because we're large groups. Most large groups don't. In the legislation you offered as a substitute to ours, of course, you did not cover pre-existing conditions. Your legislation provided for about 3 million people having greater access to the system. Ours at about 30 million. So while we agree that we ought to have people have access, frankly, we believe that what we have proposed provides greater access. We also believe that insurance pooling to acquire health insurance at lower prices, that seems to me, we agreed on that as an objective. You disagree with the way we have done it in terms of our exchanges, which is, of course, what the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan is that you and I participate in. It's a large exchange, many different insurers. In our area, we have about 25 or 26 different options that we can choose from, for the most part, private sector. As a matter of fact, for all parts, private sector, to choose from. So, yes, we have differences, but as I've told you before, I'm still prepared to discuss with you and to work with you on suggestions you have that get us to an objective that we think is appropriate. Let me just last, in closing, say a recent polling shows a majority want us to keep working. You indicate, as a number, as you do on a regular basis, there are polls that show that people are against this bill. My view is what they're really against is this confrontation and contention regarding these bills, which is, of course, why the President said he thought having 60% would give a greater level of confidence. I agree with that. And I would hope that we would have created that kind of a consensus. But I want to read to you, 63% in a Washington poll said that we ought to pass comprehensive health reform. 57% on a Kaiser Family Foundation poll, February 22nd, 10. Kaiser poll also finds overwhelming support for key elements of the reforms in our bill. 76% support reforming the way health insurance works in our bill. 71% support creating a health insurance exchange, which is in our bill, and 70% support expanding high-risk insurance pools. So when you go to the individual elements of our bill, we find very significant support for those individual elements, I tell my friend, and I continue to look forward to working with my friend to reach common ground.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, and from the summation of his remarks, I gather that there has been no willingness to listen to the American people on the part of the majority here in the House. The gentleman does know that all polls indicate that the American people want us to set the bill aside, to stop this construct that Washington's going to tell everyone how to design health care, and really start over. 73% of the public, CNN polls said last week, shelve the bill, start over. But, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the gentleman's time, and I look forward to working together with him in whatever way we can, frankly, focusing on the issue of getting America back to work. And I yield back.